So, welcome to another episode of Inspired Content during the month of November. We're in short story week, so I'll be looking at another two short stories from Fantastic Worlds, Myths, Tales, and Stories by edited by Eric S. Rabkin. And the first short story I'll be looking at is a story from 1897 by H.G. Wells called The Star. The second story I'll be looking at is by Arthur C Clarke in 1955 called The Star. I'll take a look at both of these, give my thoughts, and then go over the ideas they inspire. So I'll see you on the other side. The Star by H.G. Wells and by Arthur C Clarke. I'm going to start off by saying, in my volume at least, and I don't know if it's the case with all the others, but the editor made a little boo-boo, because the first page of the Arthur C Clarke one is tacked on as the first page of the H.G. Wells one, and vice versa. And the Wells one is half. One side is the Clarke one, and one side is H.G. Wells one. So it's literally, you can't fix it. And unfortunately, they don't run into each other in a way that makes a whole new story. They clash so abruptly that it doesn't work well. But these stories themselves were both kind of interesting, and I chose them partly because of the fact that they both are science fiction stories, they both have the same title, and they both have to do with catastrophes involving stellar phenomenon. To sort of illustrate the point that you can start with the same basic ideas and have very different stories resulting, or you can start with very different ideas and end up with the same title. Both kind of happen in this case. But let's get into the details of the H.G. Wells version. In the H.G. Wells version, the premise is pretty simple. A non-solar system body, an exoplanet, I guess, or a brown dwarf or something, comes careening into our system and sort of stirs the pot and causes enough problems. As it sweeps by, it causes some other things that are important to the story, but the way of it is sort of told as not an actual character story, not much other than a broad spectrum view of the consequences of this. So I'm going to rate it about a 6.7 out of an 8.4, because I was looking more for the stories of people as it's happening, rather than necessarily like there was no dialogue, and so there was no relating to the circumstances, I guess. But it does offer some suggestions as story elements that we can take further. So starting there, what if Earth got a new moon? Either this object is smaller than it's implied in this story, and it ends up in a position around Earth, or it swaps out for Earth's moon and becomes Earth's moon, while the other one's cast out into the solar system. That's one option, I guess. And what if it's actually like a white dwarf instead of whatever this planetary body is when it comes in? And it comes in sort of at a right angle to the plane of the planets we have now. And it stays far enough out in orbit that it doesn't really interfere with any of the planetary rotations that we currently have. at that point you're looking at how does that affect the idea of our solar system? When you're at one position in the solar system, does it look like there are two suns in the solar system? And at another position, does it look like you have a sun on one side and a sun on night side? And it's a smaller sun on night side? I mean, it makes me wonder what that kind of setting would be like if it just happened at some point and we've just kind of grown accustomed to it. What if it moves in and then gets in towards the center and ends up doing a tandem dance with the sun itself, and we end up with two suns in our system? I'm pretty sure that's already an implication and a massive change in where that Goldilocks zone around our sun is. Would it make inhabiting Mars easier or harder or what? Would we be able to inhabit the moons of Jupiter at that point? Okay, number 4. What if it's an entire solar system instead of just one exoplanet? The possibility of having not only, just a pass through to observe another solar system, but also the possibility of exploring a whole nother solar system without having to be able to fly outside of our own. That opportunity is like, we've got 100 years to do this as it passes through our solar system. I think that would make an amazing set of stories. The new sun takes us captive as it passes through our solar system, so it's a sun in and of its own right, and as it passes through, it goes through an orbit just enough to catch us, and we end up orbiting it as it keeps going through, and we're now on this new solar system of 1 or 2 planets around a smaller star at a closer orbit, headed towards the center of the galaxy. I think the leaving the solar system on our planet and having it all be roughly the same for our survival close to the sun, with the exception of the fact that we're now moving through the Milky Way on a new course, and we no longer have Mars, Venus, Mercury. It's just us and one other planet or something. What if the incoming object has trailing planets? If it's a star, or if it's a Jupiter-like planet and it drops off a moon, what if it drops off a whole alien world in our solar system that comes to life? Because as it's been traveling through interstellar space, that planet's frozen, and all life and creatures that were on it were locked into a dormant state. But now that it's settled into a new location orbiting our sun, it comes alive, and we've got a wild planet, either wildlife or a city inhabited planet, coming to life within our own solar system. So that's a lot of the ideas I came from the H.G. Wells story. Moving on into the Arthur C Clarke story, this one has character, and he's exploring the personal struggle he has with learning what he's learned. It's a little focused on the idea of how can you accept a God that would let this happen, and it loses me in that story sense, because he even says in the story that he can understand how some might argue that there's no reason why a God couldn't do whatever he wants, but I think the whole element of the story is unnecessary. But story-wise, I think 5.3 out of 7.7. Story ideas I get from it: they discover a hall of records on the last cinder within the system of the sun that went supernova. And instead of just records, stored genetic samples from which we could try to recreate the life forms that lived there. How about the actual story of the discovery of these things? I think the idea of going to a system where you find a hardened structure built to be the records of a system of people who died out in the supernova, I want to see the process of breaking into the molten, the cooled molten planet where you have to bore through the surface and get into the Hall of Records, and then the process of trying to figure out how the technology works and decode the language and really get that message, that moment of discovery of the lost words of a people who no longer exist. I want to be there for that part, not the it happened story afterwards. I want to be there when it happens. What if we wrote a story from the premise of that's about to happen to Earth? Our sun is going to go nova and it's going to obliterate everything in the front of the solar system. How do we respond? How do we deal with it? Not only on Earth as regular population as we panic and, do the end of the world business that we've seen in some movies, but what do we put in the time capsules? What do we say? What do we make? Where do we build them? How do we save that last bit of us that we put out there for anybody who might find us in the future? Finding maybe a escape capsule at the edge of a solar system that went nova with sort of like a cryostasis chamber filled with the eggs, fertilized eggs of an alien species and a sampling of their food supply so that we can recreate it. And the idea of taking them back and repopulating those people as members of Earth and sharing with them the records of their own culture. I think that would be a powerful story about people being raised in a culture that's not their own, with memories and being informed of what their culture is, but not actually experiencing it for themselves. What if we developed a supernova early warning system, and it allows us to see systems ready to go supernova, and in the process we're able to get unmanned craft to get into those systems and observe them to see what happens in a solar system when a sun goes nova. But what if one of those unmanned probes goes into a system and finds it inhabited, and we have to sit there and watch as a population dies and can't do anything about it? What if the people on that planet had that little bit of extra technology that allowed them to take slow boat stasis ships or faster than light traveling ships and were able to get away, but the population numbers they were able to take away from the planet are not enough to keep them sustainable? They're just going to dwindle and disappear. And instead of that sudden disappearance of an entire species of people from another planet, you have these refugees slowly dying out and watching themselves dwindle. So those are the ideas. It's probably a little dark at this point, but hopefully there's some inspiration in there for some story ideas for people to write. Maybe some art. Maybe come up with a story and some paintings to represent the records of a species that are now gone. Alright, so I'll see you for the next episode, and happy creating.